Hey, I'm doing a cosplay as Kira from Jujutsu Kaisen. Sorry it's such a mediocre cosplay, but I'm just an amateur. I had to do it though because I've actually noticed a lot of discussions on the internet regarding Kira's gender and the confusion about it. Thing is, there's actually a long track record of anime across the annals of time that have similar situations to Kira. There are all these genderqueer characters all across anime that are all over the spectrum of gender expression, yet they're never explicitly referred to as trans. So are us trans people being poorly represented? Or should we be lucky that we're getting any representation at all? Well, Japan doesn't see gender the same way that we in the West see it. So let's start with Kira as an example. She's introduced all cuddled up to this guy named Hikari in a way that we can only presume that they're dating. The main characters show up looking for Hikari, and then they're like, oh, the other third year student that's with Hikari is a man, right? And then another character is like, yeah, that's Kira. Besides that one instance of referring to Kira as a man in the past tense, they only use gender-neutral terminology. The creator of the original manga also had no comment about Kira's gender and left it intentionally ambiguous. In terms of the English language, it seems kind of hard to have a character be completely gender ambiguous because we always use a lot of gender-specific pronouns in other words. But Japanese doesn't really do the same thing. They have pronouns like kare for he, him and kanojo for she, her, but those are rarely used. For one, the sentence structure of Japanese often lends itself to assuming the subject of a sentence. So in the situation where pronoun might be necessary, they don't use it because it's just assumed based on context clues. But also when a pronoun is necessary, a lot of times in Japanese that's considered rude to use a pronoun for at least a stranger. And sometimes even when someone would use a pronoun, they just use the person's name instead. Which, by the way, Kira's name is also a really femme name that means something along the lines of sparkling beauty. But they have something in Japanese that we don't have in English, which are first-person pronouns. There are a ton of these pronouns, but there's three that are mainly used, and they have kind of gender connotations. Those are watashi, boku, and ore, the three most common first-person pronouns. Watashi is generally a catch-all pronoun that women use in all situations to refer to themselves, but also sometimes men use it as well. To the contrary, you have boku and ore, which are both typically used by men in casual situations, like with friends or family. Boku usually sounds more boyish, and ore is a bit more manly. But oddly enough, sometimes women use those pronouns too, although it's uncommon. Now, Kira in Jujutsu Kaisen refers to herself as Watashi, but this doesn't explicitly mean that she identifies as female, because there's also another male character in the same series named Nanami who always refers to himself as Watashi. There's a difference in how they phrase it though, because Nanami speaks very formally and professionally, and he's very articulate with his sentences. So whenever he uses the term Watashi, it comes across with a context more like he's trying to be formal and respectful and maintaining kind of like a cold distance from people when he uses that word. The difference is that Kira is a character that seemed to be using very casual language, to the point of when she meets Yuji for the first time, she immediately calls him by the nickname Yu-chan, which is a very overly friendly, like close kind of way to talk to someone. So a character that speaks like that, typically if they identified as a male, would probably use boku or ore, yet instead Kira uses watashi, which gives it a more feminine context. Besides that, another thing that leads us to believe that Kira is trans is her relationship with Hikari, which in the manga there's a panel where Hikari says something that very much portrays him to be super straight and not into men at all. So if he's presumably dating Kira, then he would have to see her as a girl, and that would at least imply that she also sees herself as a girl. Now, if they give all these implications that Kira is trans, how come they don't just come out and say it? Why leave it ambiguous? For one, there's a language barrier because there's actually no term in Japanese for transgender. The closest that I could find are, for one, the term otoko no ko, which is actually a pun that when spelled a particular way basically means femboy. Another phrase, which is okama, which is kind of a derogatory slur that typically refers to a gay man that dresses femininely. But neither of these words really mean trans. These words would more be used to refer to a character like our femboy icon of the ages, Astolfo from the Fate series. A character which clearly presents femme and dresses like a girl, yet still very clearly identifies himself as a man. I could go on listing all kinds of other characters like this across anime, such as Haruhi's dad from Ouran High School Host Club, who is basically basically a drag queen that works at a gay bar. There's also Amane from My Dress Up Darling, who very clearly identifies himself as a man and even presents mask, but he cosplays as female characters. There's also Felix/Ferris from ReZero, who clearly calls himself a man yet presents very femme. There's also Mare and Aura from Overlord, who both dress as the opposite gender. There's Seikei from the Toaru series. There's Gasper from High School DxD, and probably 1,000 others that I either don't know about or forgot to mention that are just like them. Most of these characters very clearly call themselves a man at some point. They also typically use the boku pronoun, or sometimes even ore. Of course, sometimes girls use those pronouns because Japanese is confusing that way. There's actually a whole conversation about that in My Dress Up Darling that I really liked, where both Gojo and a character named Akira mistook each other for the opposite gender based on a text conversation. And Gojo's like, wait, I referred to myself as ore, why'd you think I was a girl? And the girl's like, I don't know, I just thought you were a quirky girl using ore. Then Gojo has a realization like, wait, people can just use whatever pronouns they prefer regardless of their gender? Mind blown. But all these femboy characters are decidedly different than Kira, whose gender is a lot more ambiguous. The only example that I found of a character that is very clearly identified as transgender would be Kiku from One Piece. At some point in the show, someone refers to Kiku as a man, and Luffy questions her about it, and she's like, oh no, I'm a woman at heart. And then also the creator of the manga, Oda, went on to confirm in other material that she is in fact trans. I especially like how Kiku was portrayed because there was a juxtaposition between her and her brother Izo, because Izo is a crossdresser and wears makeup and dresses like a geisha, yet he still identifies as a man. And when you see those two put right next to each other, it really shows that there's a difference between the two. While on the topic of One Piece though, there's also another character whose gender is confusing, which is Yamato. Yamato calls himself the reincarnation of a man named Odin, and refers to themselves with the boku pronoun, yet also Oda put Yamato's official gender as female. In spite of that, Yamato's father Kaido even refers to Yamato as his son, which I find kind of hilarious because you have this evil overlord pirate who's also an abusive father who would go so far as to strap explosives to his own child, but he's like, nah man, that's where I draw the line. Misgendering people, that's just too evil. If my child's gonna call themselves a man, then that's my son. Then there's even a hot spring scene at the end of that story arc where you have Kiku in the women's bathroom with all the girls and Yamato's in the men's bath with all the guys. In spite of all that, Oda still listed Yamato's official gender as female, which is just plain confusing. So are we left to interpret that as Yamato is more non-binary or gender fluid? I don't know, it's just weird. Added to the list of gender ambiguous characters just like Hirora. Whoops, I just noticed that I forgot to put on the fake piercings to complete my cosplay. Well, better to do it halfway through the video than never. Retcon that, but screw you, I'm not refilming the first part of the video. Remember what I said at the beginning, amateur cosplayer? Anyway, another character that's kind of similar to Yamato from One Piece is Haruhi from Our in High School Host Club. The whole plot of the show is that she has to dress mask and pretend to be a guy to work in a host club. She says at some point in the anime that she doesn't really feel like either gender, and she doesn't mind dressing like a guy and presenting mask, but she also doesn't mind presenting femme and dressing like a girl. So you see her all across the show presenting both femme and mask, and she never seems to have a strong feeling towards either one either way. Yet they never really label her as anything throughout the show, so it's left kind of ambiguous. So this ambiguous treatment of gender in anime is not a new thing at all. We can even rewind back 15 years to the Hunter x Hunter anime. There's a character in that named Neferpito, which is basically Felix's long-lost cross-dimensional sibling. Now, Neferpito is never referred to with gender-specific language, but they use the boku pronoun, which is kind of a masculine context, but as we established before, it doesn't necessarily mean that they identify as a man. There are some context clues that imply them to be male, but again, it's left pretty ambiguous. Then you add on to the fact that they're from another species called chimera ants, which is all kinds of weird and confusing, and then their gender just gets even more muddled, which there's another confusing thing involving the chimera ants in that show, which is to do with Kite, who at first starts out as a human man, who then dies and gets reincarnated as a chimera ant later. But when he gets reborn as a chimera ant, he looks like a girl. In chimera ant form, Kite also starts out using the Atachi pronoun, which is kind of a weird baby talk version of a super femme pronoun. But then when they're speaking to Gon, who only ever knew them as a man, they use the ore pronoun, which is what they used previously, which just makes it extra confusing. I also once read this huge tangent that someone went into on the internet that I probably won't be able to find again, but basically they were saying that the chimera ants, since all of them are soldier ants, basically they're all biologically male by the rules of ants. So even the ones that look and present very femme are technically biologically male, So does that make them all like trans or intersex of some sort? I mean, of course they are a make-believe fantasy race, so they could use whatever rules they feel like. I did find that to be a pretty fun concept to think about though. But Hunter x Hunter actually has a lot of gender screwery in it besides even that. I mean, you've got femboy Kurapika as one of the main characters, and then also whatever the heck Melody is, who Kurapika of all people misgenders at one point. But then there's another character named Aluka who I thought was one of the most heavily implied to be trans. She's introduced as Killua's little sister, yet you see all the rest of the family calling her their son or brother. Then you even see her represented in flashbacks where she looks a lot more masked than she does in the present time. Yet Killua very clearly calls her his little sister, and she even expresses that Killua is her favorite family member and she loves him the most. It kind of creates this interesting unspoken backstory where you can imagine that there was probably a time off screen where Aluka came out as trans, but her whole family rejected it and refused to call her by her preferred pronouns. Except for Killua, who did respect her and see her as her appropriate gender. I loved this concept because it shows a bit of the reality of what being trans is actually like. Just like how when I came out as trans, most of my family didn't approve of it. And they still, to this day, don't call me by my preferred name or pronouns. So I saw all this subtext surrounding Aluka and I was like, I get this character, I understand that, I can relate to them. Even though she was never specifically identified as trans. In that same kind of line of thinking, there's another character named Momoe from an anime called Wonder Egg Priority. Now she presents very masked and is often mistaken for a man, and even when they first introduce her, she calls herself the name Momotaro, which is a masculine name, and she uses the Boku pronoun. However, when the main character first calls her a girl, she lights up and immediately gets so excited because gender euphoria. Momoe's whole character arc is about a struggle with gender dysphoria and being mistaken for a man. To the point where she keeps getting hit on by girls, which I'm like, dang, I wish I had your problem. Too bad for her that she's straight. But I related to this character so hard that just about every scene with her in it had me tearing up. Like in one scene when all the girls get together to do their nails, and Momo is so excited because she just loves that she gets to be with all the girls doing girl things with them. Then there's also a moment in the show when Momoe meets another character who at first seems like a girl, but then goes on to say that they are a man on the inside, which is about as clear as you're going to get in Japanese as saying that he's trans. And there's a really magical T for T moment whenever they both see each other as their real genders. And I just thought that moment was so special and relatable as a trans person myself. Now, the way this character is represented has got a similar problem to Kira because never do they explicitly say that Momoe is biologically male. She could very well be a cis female who just struggles with having a lot of masculine traits. In that way, you could make the argument that she's more like Nagisa from Assassination Classroom, a character who is cis male, presents mask, yet gets mistaken for a girl all the time, to the point that they even make him cross-dress as a joke throughout the show. Yet Nagisa also expresses gender dysphoria in situations like how you find out that his mom forces him to keep his hair long because she always wanted a daughter, and yet Nagisa seems to hate this and he just wants to be a man. All this made me think that Nagisa kind of has a bit of a kinship with trans masks despite being cis. And you could make the argument that Momoe is the same way. They could just both be cisgender people who experience gender dysphoria. But you know what? I don't care. Just because they're cis doesn't make me relate to them any less. They're still characters that have traits that make them super relatable for trans people, so I love them. And in that same vein, you've also got characters like Haku from Naruto or the Angel Devil from Chainsaw Man. Characters that are male, yet they're not trying to present female, yet they still get mistaken for women, or at least have androgynous or femme traits to them. They're different from femboys who are trying to present femme, and they're also different from trans people who are identifying as femme. So you've got all these characters that are all breaking gender norms in their own way, yet almost none of them are clearly defined or identified as trans. What the heck? When I first realized this, I was really annoyed. Like, stop being cowards and just label your characters as trans already. Truth is, Japan is actually a really conservative country with very traditional views on gender. I know, they're also the origin of super gay genres like yuri and yaoi, but same-sex marriage is still illegal in Japan. And they also have a slew of laws that make it really hard for trans people to transition. And you know, yuri and yaoi actually started out as genres that weren't about romance. They were just about very close relationships between people of the same sex that had some heavy gay subtext. So I like to think of all these genderqueer characters in a similar way to the early phases of yuri and yaoi. It's like Japanese artists and authors found a loophole to represent trans characters, and they did it by referring to the characters in a more ambiguous way that kind of gets around the current societal climate in that country. This is also why I love anime as an entertainment medium. Because anime, manga, and light novels are made for the social outcasts of the world. It's all targeted at an audience of that weirdo loser shut-in kid who has no friends because he has some weird quirk that nobody likes. So anime always has weirdos as the main characters. People like the kid who wants to be a superhero but has no superpowers in a world where everybody has superpowers. Or the guy who has an obsession with painting creepy Hina dolls. Or the lesbian that gets isekai'd into the world of a dating sim with only male love interests. In the same way, we get all these gender-ambiguous queer characters all throughout anime, and they're almost always portrayed in a positive light. Almost all the characters that I listed in this video are protagonists, with the exceptions of Neferpitou, who's a major villain, and Seike, who's a minor villain. So even if very little of these characters are actually labeled as trans, it's awesome that they all exist, because it's normalizing the idea of not conforming to traditional gender norms just by saturating media with characters like this. It's probably why I latched on to anime so much in favor of Western media, because without even looking for it, I found all these queer characters just by accident. Even just recently, I started watching an anime called That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. Now, I'm watching this anime in Japanese without subtitles in an effort to learn Japanese, so I haven't been able to follow it very well. But best I can follow it is that Rimuru started out as a man in his previous life, got reincarnated as a slime, which is genderless, then went on to consume a female body to then get that as a humanoid shape. And then there was a scene shortly after he got his body where he was inspecting it and he was like, yep, no genitals on there. So you have a genderless slime in the body of a female that looks femme, yet he identifies as a man. So if that's not trans, I don't know what is. So I love that we get to see all these characters. Even in an anime as popular as Jujutsu Kaisen, we get a character like Kirara, and it's just further normalizing the idea of non-traditional gender expression. The only bad thing that I have to say is that I feel like I very rarely see any representation for the trans-masc leaning side, at least in anime. Maybe I'm just not privy to that because I just gravitate towards the femme stuff. So if you watching this know of any trans-masc leaning characters in anime, then say so in the comments because I'd like to know. And also leave a comment letting me know of any of your favorite genderqueer characters across anime. But that does it for me for this video. If you want to see more of the stuff that I do, you can check out my Patreon for where I write gay stories, or my Twitch where I play video games, or my Instagram where I barely do anything. But besides that, you can also subscribe to my channel and check out my videos for more videos nothing like this. And besides that, stay gay and stay nerdy. Bye bye!